Tony Vandervelde gave me permission, because I was driving for him, to race for Rob Walker, who I'd met. And I knew Rob had, well-produced cars, or well-maintained, and I asked him, what about Argentina? And they paid quite well, and it was arranged that I'd drive his Cooper, just like this one. I think that we were taken a little bit as a joke until we went out and sort of practiced and showed the thing really had got quite a lot of performance. And it was particularly easy to drive, and therefore you could overdrive it. Winning it was actually not as difficult as it might have been, I suppose, apart from the problem with tires and so on. But I think that having won it, that the English public and the people interested in racing were quite surprised and responded, accordingly.
Everybody said, oh, well, Sterling can win on a wheelbarrow. It doesn't really mean anything. Well, the next race was Monaco. We were fourth on the grid. And Morris was a very, very accurate driver, and Monaco suited him particularly because he didn't throw a car around. He was terribly accurate and terribly precise and very careful on the car and the gearbox.
I think that Morris was a man who would start out very consistently and keep the same sort of lap time and just keep wearing away at everybody else. And I think that because of that, he was, able to come through and win the race. This certainly was not the best car for Monty. I seem to remember we chopped the nose off and made it as short as we could, because it's a fairly big car. But it was responsive and that sort of thing. But because of the flat spot, that at a place like Monaco, of course, became worse than it would on many other circuits. But it was quick.
Guerra took the lead in the VRM. Well, that didn't worry us very much because we knew that was. And then anyway, Hawthorne came up, and he held the lead for some time. And on lap 40, he dropped out because of, and we took the lead then. And we had 60, it was a 100-lap race then, we had 60 laps to do in the lead, and I can tell you, it was really too much for me, although I was supposed to be timing. I was hiding under the pit counter, as far as I remember. But Morris had no trouble. There was only one thing that happened. Musso was catching him a bit, and Alf, without being told by me, stepped out and gave Morris a wave-on sign to get on with it a bit, and Morris immediately drew away, and he won the race quite comfortably from Musso. We then had Maurice Trantignon driving the second car, and Sterling came out, and he sort of waved Maurice Trantignon on and sort of got him into a real state, and he just failed to win the race himself by about a bonnet's length, and McLaren won his first race. Then 1960, Colin Chapman came out with the Lotus 18, and this was the first real rear-engine car that handled properly. I mean, the others were just put together, but this was a proper set-up job. And we couldn't hold it with the Coopers, and Innes Ireland beat Sterling at Goodwood. And Sterling then went to Colin Chapman and said, could Rob have a Lotus 18? And Colin, I think, thought, well, I'm not going to win a world championship on my own, but with Sterling in the car, I think we could. And so he let us have one, and we got it 10 days before Monaco of 1960, and we duly won the race.
So Colin Chapman picked up the Cooper theme and improved on it with his Lotus 18, his first rear-engine design.
Well, everything went fairly well according to plan. It was the first time I'd ever driven at Monaco, and I can remember Sterling in practice showing me the line round, and I just followed him everywhere, and he would put up 2 fingers for second gear, not that one, and, indicating what gear I should be in. Because Monaco is a bit of a daunting place, or it used to be, with, because, if you hit the casino, it didn't move very far. And So Sterling was a great help there. In the race itself, for the first time, we had 2 different fuel tanks and a switchover thing. And suddenly, just after the pits, just starting to go up the hill, the thing just cut out, exactly as if it had run out of fuel. And I turned the tap over and left it in gear, you know, but nothing happened. So then I thought, well, all I've got to do is push it to the top of the hill, and if I, you know, get up there, then it'll fire up running down the other side. So I did that, and of course the first thing was that the marshals made me push. I had to get it on the pavement, and of course nobody was allowed to help, and so it was a hell of a sweat getting it onto the pavement, up and over, you know. And the marshal, you know, I was pushing up the hill, you know, so every now and then I'd have to stop. I used to get down and sort of let it jam on my shoulder, I think. And then this marshal took pity on me, and he gave me a bloody great stone that he found. So, you know, I had that, and every time I'd have to stop, and I'd put the stone under the wheel. And eventually got to the top and ran it down the other side. So by this time, I'd come out at the bottom there, and I thought, well, I might as well push it. There were, you know, a lot of cars had dropped out, and I game to the last, I suppose. I thought, well, you know, maybe there'll be nobody left by the end and I'll win this race. So I just kept on pushing it back to the start. And, it's funny nowadays, I can hardly walk that hill on my own, never mind push one of these things.
Overcast skies look down on Monaco's harbour as the last stages of the race approach. Now only 6 cars are left in the running. Sterling is firmly in the lead. Bonnier has retired on lap 78 with rear suspension collapse on his BRM, and McLaren has thrust his way past Phil Hill's Ferrari to take 2nd place. Innis Ireland has made it and arrives exhausted at the finish line. Rob Walker anxiously watches his Lotus as it passes on its last laps, and the walking wounded stagger up towards the checkered flag in order to be counted in as finishers. And at last we can relax. Here is Moss, winner on Rob Walker's Lotus of the 18th Monaco Grand Prix at 67.33 miles an hour. McLaren is 2nd and Phil Hill 3rd. It is Rob Walker's 2nd victory at Monaco and is a triumph for Sterling Moss, who once again has shown that he really is the greatest of them all.
Rob, unfortunately, was the last possible chance that his sort of person could sponsor cars, unless it changes again. Rob was a fairly wealthy man. I don't think as wealthy as many people thought. I think he was a fairly wealthy man and enjoyed being a sponsor. He had raced himself and driven himself, of course, but a great character, you know. I mean, Rob Walker raced before the war. I think it was Le Mans, that's right. And Rob, when it got dusk, he realised that he had sports jacket and brown shoes on. That you know, you don't wear that. And so he came and he changed into dark shoes and a lounge suit for the evening, a spell. And then in the morning he changed back again. And this actually happened during a motor race, and in which he placed reasonably well. But he is an incredible character. I mean, Rob would do the timing of my car, and he had all his watches lined up and everything, and he was so nice to drive for, because he left it to Alf Francis, who was of course the chief mechanic, and myself to work out what we were going to do, how we would run the race. In fact, the race, I think, he would really leave it to me. He would give me signals telling me what the thing was, so I could read what the race was from in the cockpit, and I knew what all my instruments said, and I knew exactly what the tyres were like and how the car felt. And he left me to interpret his signals as to what I wanted to do. And this worked out extremely well, because I happen to be the sort of person that enjoys doing that. And also having been under the discipline of Mercedes-Benz and Neubauer, and also having been with other people, Aston Martin and so on, it was really nice to have a one-man outfit where we were all trying to do one thing. I had a mechanic who was tremendous. I mean, Alf Francis, I'll never forget, in this car, or maybe a sister car, I was looking around it on the start line at, no, I think actually it was Cooper, at Monaco, And I pointed down. I said, "What's that, Alf?" And my God, it's got a small crack in the chassis, and this is like 5 minutes to go. And he had the sides off, and with the tanks here, and there are tanks in the side of these things. He actually started to weld the thing on the start line, and everybody drawing back, and just leaving Alf there with wet cloths on. And the team with a patron like Rob and with a mechanic like Alf, and somebody who wants to drive and win and have a go, it worked extremely well. I mean, we had our rows. Alf was very touchy. He was a Pole, and I'm not the easiest person. Rob, in fact, made up for all the difficulties of the team. I think he was the easygoing guy. Rob is a gentleman, as is summed up in his passport, under profession. It just says gentleman, and really there's nothing else you can say.
We ran in the TT with a 250 GT Ferrari, and in those days, Aston Martin and Jaguar considered they were absolutely fantastic at pit stops. In fact, they even went on television and had a competition against each other. We had never done any because we were always Formula One. We'd only done these 2 sports car races. Alf did a few practices and took I don't know how many seconds off Aston Martins. In fact, it left Sterling in such a position that he literally could walk home. I think in the whole of the TT, we took 88 seconds off Aston Martins, just in the pit stops. And we'd never done them before in our lives. So Alf got them efficient fairly quickly.
With Moss fully fit again, the Walker team ended the 1960 season and the 7-year reign of 2.5-litre Formula One regulations by winning the US Grand Prix Riverside in California. For the first time in the history of Formula One, a single front-engine car was entered.
They changed into 1.5 litres, and we hadn't got a 1.5 litre engine except for the Formula 2, and Ferrari had it absolutely, as Ferraris always do. And we were at least 30 horsepower. The first race we won was Monaco, which Sterling won. His skill, and he was down to 3.5 seconds ahead, I think that was halfway through the race. As if they were bound benches. But somehow he held, although they had 3 cars and they were taking it in turns, he held them all, and he won the race. And in both times when Sterling was, and when won, in the last 10 laps, Ferrari had put out a signal, give all, and to their driver. And when they put that signal, I knew for certain that we'd won the race, because they were giving all for about 90 laps. And he certainly never got any more to go. The next one was the Nürburgring, and this was when Innocent helped us, because at Solitude he put on wet tires in the dry, and they had held very well and they hadn't burst, and Dunlop said it wasn't safe to do it. So we painted the green spot on the wet tires, and we painted it out with black paint. And when Dunlops came to examine the race tires before the race, they said, yes, those are okay. And in fact, we did tell them before the race, and it was doubtful whether it was going to be wet or dry, and so I think they were happy on that point. And Sterling got a good lead to start with, and although they were catching us 3.5 seconds down the straight alone, he was getting away from them all the time at the back. And they got very close to us in the last 2 laps, and then it suddenly poured with rain. And of course, Sterling in the rain, nobody could touch him. And he finished, I think, 22 seconds ahead, and it probably was his finest race. I never forget, with 300,000 Germans there and them playing the national anthem, and the British Army were in the grandstand and they held up the Union Jack, and it really was a very moving moment for me.
Only Moss's brilliance on driver's circuits could stay with 120-degree V6 Ferrari, and Phil Hill went on to take the 1961 World Championship.
By this time we had the V8, 1.5 litre, and we raced in Belgium. And then Goodwood came, and I said, look, Sterling, will you come down to Po with me? Because I think it's a good practice for Monaco. And he said, well, I see my British public so seldom, I want to race at Goodwood. So I said, all right, well, I'll lend you the car, and you can race, because it was the Formula One car, and I'll take the Formula 2 car, and Maurice Trantino can race it at Po. And they asked me whether I would like it entered in my name at Goodwood, and I thought, well, another victory would be nice. And then suddenly I realized they had done 2 races with it, and my mechanics hadn't prepared the car. And I said, no, I don't want it entered in my name. Your mechanics have prepared it. It's up to be entered in your name. And of course, Sterling had his dreadful accident there. I knew nothing about it. We went to Po. We won at Po. I was at the prize giving. Somebody came up to me and said, how's Sterling? And I said, as far as I know, he's very well. And they said, oh, haven't you heard? He's just had the most dreadful accident. And I stayed in the daytime by his bedside for about 4 hours every day, and they wanted that when he came to, which was really about 6 weeks when he properly came to, they wanted somebody he knew to be by his bedside, and his father did every night beside him. We went on racing with Trantino, driving the cars. He'd been my driver before. We didn't have any, I don't think we won any points with it. And by this time we'd got the Lotus 24, and Colin had said it would be exactly the same as the works car. Well, it was at the time that he delivered it, but immediately he came out with a Lotus 25, which was the monocoque. And John Cooper made his famous remark at Zandvoort, I thought that you were going to sell, Rob, exactly the same as your Formula One cars. And Colin said, oh, well, it is more or less the same, you know, the slight change in the bodywork. And John Cooper leant over and looked inside and said, oh, yes, it is exactly the same, except you forgot to put the chassis in. And that Lotus 24 was not a good car. And at the end of the season, I had Rodriguez drive it at Mexico. And it was very quick up to a certain point, and then suddenly it went without any warning. And Rodriguez was practicing. Surtees had just done a faster lap in Mexico than him. His father went up and told him. He went out, and on the first lap, he was killed. Of course, this shook me considerably, and I remember walking up exactly where I was here when I had the message that he was killed, and saying, you know, should I give up motor racing? And I thought, well, I don't think it's been my life always. I've never done anything else. I think I'll keep going, but I'll get a very safe driver. And I got Bonnier. And Bonnier was very safe. We won 1 or 2 races, but no Grand Prix, and we didn't do very well, got the points once or twice.
(1965) though was to be Jim Clark's year, with Scott winning in Belgium, here in France, and taking 4 more Grand Prix to take the World Championship for the second time. Until the very last race of the 1.5 litre field. Their first and only win with their interesting transverse engine 1.5 litre machine.
The following year, they changed the formula to 3 litres, and I decided to have one. It was Joe Sifford. We had the Cooper Maserati, which he did very well with, but it wasn't. It wasn't really competitive, and we were happy to get rid of it. And we managed to get Colin 49 in 60. The first one, the most dreadful race of the champions, and it was just damp, and he went off the road and broke the monitor. We took it back to the racing shop, and somebody worked and it arced, and the whole racing shop just went up so fast that everything was burnt in it, and it went up so fast, everything was destroyed. Anyway, Colin let me have another one between times, which wasn't a very good one. It was very tired having come back. And he said, I'll let you have a 49B as soon as they're out. And in fact, we always used to build our own Lotuses. And we were still building it when the start of the British Grand Prix practice at Brands Hatch. About lap 30, the Ferrari, and we won the race. And I think really that because Sebby Siff and I was learning from him. But with Siff, I had learned a lot from Stern. And I could give him tips, and I really was in command of the team. And to win the British Grand Prix, I'd never dreamt of. Exciting thing, I suppose.
Vera, Shell, Godier and Gould were also entered on Maseratis, and Stirling Moss had Rob Walker's little 1.9-litre Cooper Climax, renamed Sputnik 3 by the local press. This made up a field of 10 cars, including our 3 Dinos. Pete and Musso drove the Casablanca cars, and I had a new car with experimental brakes and an aero screen, which I prefer to the normal wraparound Perspex job. In the end, Stirling made it with 2.7 seconds to spare from Musso, and I crossed the line 10 seconds later to finish third.
It was, of course, the first time, I think, that a rear-engine car had competed in the World Championship event. And the others, because it looked so small and not really competitive alongside a Ferrari and so on, I think that we were taken a little bit as a joke until we went out and sort of practiced and showed the thing really had got quite a lot of performance. And it was particularly easy to drive, and therefore you could overdrive it. Well, Tony van der Velde gave me permission, because I was driving for him, to race for Rob Walker, who I'd met. And I knew Rob had, well-produced cars, or well-maintained, and I asked him, what about Argentina? And they paid quite well, and it was arranged that I'd drive his Cooper, just like this one, with I think a 2.2-litre engine, because the engines, the Climax engine, they had a Climax engine, they were gradually being enlarged, and at that time had not, reached 2.5 litres, so we had a 2.2. It was a very twisty circuit, and I remember one of the biggest problems we had was tyre wear. We were very concerned about it. And of course, on these cars, you could never do a quick change, because they were nut and bolt virtually, the way the wheels were held on. And this was one big concern we had.
Of all the races that count for the World Championship, the Grand Prix of Monaco provides the most luxuriant setting. It is run round houses over the twisting roads of Monte Carlo. The 1.9-mile circuit an unending series of twists and turns. There are no straights. From the start on the quayside, the circuit doubles back on itself after the gasometer turn, goes right at Saint-Devote and up the hill to the Casino Square, then plunges downhill with a right and left turn past the railway station. Right and right again to the front and the tunnel, along the promenade and a left-hand turn completed the circuit. Pete and Louise had flown straight back from Sicily to Monaco, where they were living on their yacht, and I wired them to meet me at Nice airport. I had hoped to fly my Vega Gull down, but the weather reports were bad, and I took the normal airline service. Louise was waiting for me in their little Vespa, a wonderful little motor car. The second session started at 5:45 a.m. on Friday morning, a convenient time if you happen to want to watch practice on your way home from one of Monte Carlo's nightclubs, and good, too, for the cars, in that both the air and the circuit were cooler. Even at that hour, Monte Carlo looks lovely. The yachts lined up in the harbour, the water lapping their sides, the white terraces of houses rising one above another to the mountains behind, interspersed with palm trees and that pink flower whose name I can neither spell nor remember. If you add the sight and sound of racing cars roaring through the streets, you have a picture that gladdens the heart of the British motor racing enthusiast. The BRM equipe did not get up early in view of their satisfactory showing of the day before, but everyone else was out. Overnight, Tavoni had arranged the changing of gear ratios, which were too high, and my Perspex screen was replaced by the aero screen that I prefer. In addition, Perspex hardtops had been fitted over the protruding air intakes. I was able to knock a second off my The two Lotus, driven by Allison and Hill, had qualified safely, if not without various troubles. They were both 1957 Formula 2 cars, but were fitted with the 1960cc Coventry Climax engine. Only two independents qualified, Bonnier and Scarlatti, both of whom drove Maseratis. Scarlatti's car was the later of the two, but there was nothing between them as to time. And so we went on for 5 laps, during which Sterling broke the lap record of 1 minute 40.7 seconds, and I took it back in the next lap of 1 minute 40.6, where it stayed for the rest of the race. We were having a wonderful race, but then about lap 37, as we left the tunnel, I suddenly saw smoke coming out of the van wall exhaust, and Sterling drove slowly into the pits. They found that a cam follower had fractured, and the last van wall was out. At this stage, things looked good for Ferrari, and only Trantino in the second place spoiled a Ferrari 1-2-3-4. I had about 13 seconds on him, and I found I could hold him there quite easily. So I decided to leave it, and perhaps work it up nearer the end without pressing the car unduly. It was still going beautifully, and the understeer was either better or I was becoming used to it. Then, as so often happens when I think I'm all set for a win, something happened. Going down past the station on lap 46, I put my foot down and the engine missed. Then it picked up again. As I turned onto the front to go towards the tunnel, I put my foot down, and this time it cut out altogether. It spluttered once or twice and then just packed up. I walked slowly back to the pits, and walking past the hotel near the station, I looked up into one of the rooms, and a lovely blonde girl looked out. I stopped and asked if she had a glass of water, not the most original of remarks, but one that lovely blondes, whose answer to most questions is no, could hardly refuse. She asked me to come in, and as I climbed in through the window, I was caught by an Autosport photographer. but even he did not realize there was a blonde inside. I had my glass of water, several of them, and then returned to the pits in a much better temper.
One of the greatest circuits ever anyway, but the fact that the public are so close to you and you're sort of playing to the crowd is very nice, and the fact that I remember quite well going down towards the station. There was Oscar's bar on the left and a very pretty girl then. We used to blow kisses at her every lap, and I'm sure that Mike probably found this one with a glass of water somewhere else. And if you did break down, the people there would obviously ask you in and give you refreshments, and I should think Michael went in there and probably chatted her up as well, actually, yes.
I stood at the gasworks urging on Luigi and Pete, who are now second and third respectively. With 60 laps gone, Luigi needed to pick up a second per lap, but they could do nothing about it. And so the little French driver Trintignant took the flag to give private owner Walker his second major Grand Prix with the little Cooper, just as in 1955 he had scored an unexpected win for Ferrari over the Mercs. Musso and Pete followed him over the line and thought themselves very lucky to finish so high up. They complained bitterly about their cars. The engines were very bad and had a rough period when all the power seemed to disappear. However, Luigi's second place put him in the lead for the championship with 12 points, as he had also finished second in the Argentine. This small crumb of comfort served to offset the second win of the astonishing little Cooper, a car costing only about a quarter of the price of a normal Grand Prix car.
Well, Morris was a very good, consistent, steady driver, not the fastest, not the flashiest, but a very good, precise driver, and of course at Monaco this matters. And also at Monaco, I think it particularly suits the style of those small rear-engine cars, as we've proven time and again. I think that Morris was a man who would start out very consistently and keep the same sort of lap time and just keep wearing away at everybody else. And I think that because of that, he was, able to come through and win the race.
Zandvoort was a funny circuit in that there were a succession of curves on the back of the circuit, and unless you had the car absolutely and drifting to the left again. And the Van Wall was a great car, but it wasn't one that enjoyed being thrown around. The 250F Maserati was a motor car that lent itself to being thrown around. You could throw it into drift, out of drift, with power side out of corners. The Van Wall wasn't that sort of motor car. It preferred to be cornered more closely to the geometrical line. You certainly had a drift, but it used to slightly understeer, and was not particularly forgiving. It really went quickly, but not in a way that you felt able to take liberties with it. So I found difficulty getting my car set up properly for Zandvoort.
Moss and the one remaining Van Wall stayed safely out in front. I finished fifth, so our chances, which had looked so good at the start of the season, were just being thrown away. On the second lap, Pete took Tony, and I nipped in ahead of Gendebien, while Musso had gone ahead of Vera and Lewis Evans. Third time round, Tony had gone ahead of Pete and was really having a go, but I noticed that his car was beginning to smoke a little. It was obviously getting worse. By 4 laps he had dropped right back, and Tony was going away from him. Then, on the 5th lap, Pete waved me past, and I set off in pursuit of Tony. Tony had a lead of 41 seconds, and there were only 10 laps to go. Obviously, there wasn't a great deal I could do. It must have been about this time that just as I was about to lap Graham Hill on the Lotus, he blew up in a cloud of smoke, leaving a telltale line of oil on the circuit. It could have been very nasty to him bursting it there, as he could so easily have spun off. However, he kept it under control and pulled off course. Very few cars were left now of the 19 starters, and the Spa circuit was quite deserted. I thought that if I could not catch Tony, I must make the fastest lap, and I got this at 3 minutes 59.3 seconds, and was pulling back quite a few seconds on Tony. Then David York speeded Tony up, and although most of the reports said that he did not regain fastest lap, the Ferrari pits thought so, and hung out a sign to say so. Perhaps this was just to keep me going quickly. It was on the last lap, so I just had to go. I put everything I got into it, and I knew that it was going to be a very fast one. I thumped it through Stavolo pretty quickly, and then coming up to the hairpin just before the pit, I lost it for a fraction of a second, and it went sideways. Hell, I thought, I've ruined it now. I've lost the fastest lap, I won't get it. I got round and accelerated down to the finishing line, and I suppose I was about 150 yards from the line when there was a loud and all too familiar crash as the engine blew up in a very big way. I slipped it into neutral and coasted over the line with a tremendous plume of white smoke pouring from the exhaust. I did not even bother to think about the fastest lap then. It was obvious I had had it, for clouds of white smoke from a racing car does not denote a happy event, as it does in Vatican circles in Rome. There it means a new pope has been elected, but in Grand Prix racing circles it means you have had it in a big way. I got to the bottom of the pits and stopped. Tony Brooks had stopped there too. That was lucky, Tony said. Just as I took the hairpin, my gearbox started to jam. Just as I was telling him that was nothing to what I had done to my engine, Lewis Evans, who was third, drew up with his front wheel at a drunken angle, having just broken the top right-hand wishbone. The first car to arrive in a reasonably saleable condition was Cliff Allison, who had done a fine job in bringing the Lotus into fourth place. And I walked back with Tony, congratulating him on his first major Grand Prix win, at an average of 129.93 miles an hour into the bargain. He went off to collect his prize from ex-King Leopold and his wife, and then I was called over. The ex-King of the Belgians is a tremendous enthusiast. He and his wife run a Ferrari themselves, and while I was chatting to him, I told him how hard I had tried to get the lap record. But you did get it, he said, on that last lap. I timed it myself. So, of course, I was delighted. It meant an extra point in the championship, but I was more pleased because I had really tried for it.
He, I think, in trying to catch me in the latter stages of the race, made fastest lap. I think he blew the Ferrari up going over the line, in fact, on the very last lap. And it was a race where a lot of people finished up in with some sort of problems, and my gearbox wasn't of the best either. I seem to remember that I wasn't able to get all my gears either. So it was an interesting race, but very satisfying race to me, because I consider it one of the driver's circuits. So obviously it's more satisfying to win on a driver's circuit than just one of run-of-the-mill circuits.
This result brought me up in the championship with a bang. I now had 14 against Sterling's 17, and was second, which was very different from my indifferent fourth place with 7 points after Zandvoort, when Sterling was still top with 17. But the fact remained that after 4 World Championship races had been run, Ferrari had still to register a victory.
Must have been 58, the year he won the championship. I went back to I was in the same hotel with them, and Mike had said, oh, come up to the room and for a drink or something or another. So I went up there, and Peter Collins was there with his wife, or girlfriend as she was at the time, I think. And I said, Peter was on his own in the room. And I said, where's Mike? And he said, oh, he's in the bathroom. So I went into the bathroom, and there was Mike in this full bath of water with all his clothes on, and this girl, and The whole thing was hysterical.
After a good party in Paris on the Tuesday night, I set off for Le Mans on Wednesday with Bernard Caillet, a motoring correspondent for one of the American motoring magazines, in his very much modified Renault Dauphine, at a rate of knots that would have horrified Rodney Walkerly. It certainly did me. However, he seemed to have the situation in hand, and after lunch, on the way, Bernard dropped me off at the Hotel de Paris, where I usually stay, and I went off to have a look at the cars. The race had been reinstated this year as a World Sports Car Championship event, but I did not think we stood a very good chance, mainly due to the brakes again, our drums against the discs of the Astons and Jaguars. Our only hope was rain, a hope that was more than amply fulfilled in the event. It was, I think, about this time that Ferrari had made his widely quoted statement, worthy of Mahomet at his best, that fuel injection originated in Germany, disc brakes in England, and neither had yet reached Maranello. However, discs were to do so before the year was out. The race itself and the South Circuit, over which the 24-hour race is run, are too well known to warrant further description here. It is without doubt a tremendous spectacle, and its fairground atmosphere with cars racing around at high speed in the dark, with headlights blazing and the lighted booths, shooting galleries, dancing halls and eating places, have over the years given the race an importance which is not really justified. But then I speak for the drivers, who consider it as dangerous an event as the early Christians did when they discovered it was real lions they had to play with. The analogy is more apt than it may seem, because both events were big attractions from the box office point of view. The scene on the morning of the race is incredible as charter planes and light aircraft queue up to land on the airfield behind the grandstands. And to the British and American motor racing enthusiast, it is as Mecca is to the pilgrim. As a wet weather car, the Ferrari was not as good as the Jag, and it was bad luck on Duncan and Ivor that the former crashed in the closing hours of the race. It was, I think, the speed differential that caused this crash. A little French car running in front of him ran into a cloudburst just after Arnage, which obscured the driver's vision completely, causing him to brake almost to a standstill. Duncan came along, then swerved to avoid it, got a wheel onto the grass and spun. The Jaguar went end over end. Only Duncan doesn't call it end over end. Duncan was taken off to hospital with bruises all over him, and that is a lot of bruises because there's a lot of Duncan. Many amusing stories are told of his stay in hospital, but I like best the one that describes Duncan's agony, lying in bed watching all the 10,000 franc notes of his second prize floating out of the window one after the other. This upset him much more than his physical injuries. Another great performance was that of Peter and Graham Whitehead, who brought their privately owned and outdated Aston Martin into second place behind the Ferrari. Peter had won Le Mans in 1951 in a Jaguar with his friend Peter Walker, which gave this country their first win at Le Mans for 16 years. Folkestone, when the two Whiteheads crashed in the Tour de France later in the year, and the quiet and charming Peter lost his life. After literally a flying visit to England, I was back in Paris again, en route for Reims in the French Grand Prix, the next round in the World Championship. The high-speed circuit suited the Ferrari, and I won the race, but the joy was taken away because of the fatal accident to Luigi Musso. It was a tragedy, and particularly so for Italy, as Musso was the last remaining Italian driver of Grand Prix caliber. Afterwards, Enzo Ferrari said, "I have won at Reims, but the price is too high. I have lost the only Italian driver who mattered in Formula One racing." I never knew him well, although he was a most likable person, but he was too conscious of the fact that he was the only Italian driver of note. It made him try too hard. He felt that he must press on for the sake of national honor. Italian prestige was at stake, he felt, and consequently he tried that much harder. I had gained 3 points more than Sterling by my win, and this brought us level with 23 points each. The next round was the British Grand Prix at Silverstone.
I raced at Silverstone when I was third in the British Grand Prix, and this was with the 2-litre Cooper, just really a Formula 2 car with a slightly larger engine. And I remember going extremely well and beating the Van Wall for third position behind Hawthorne.
To everyone's joy, Pete turned round to win the British Grand Prix at an average of 102 miles an hour. I came in just 24 seconds behind him, with Salvadori third. It gave me 7 points lead over Sterling, and it brought Pete up to 14, which meant he was in a position to challenge Sterling for second place. Tragically, only 3 weeks later, Pete was to lose his life at the Nürburgring. Tony was leading the race, and I was behind Pete as we went into the little dip, which is the Pflanzgarten. As Pete accelerated out of it, he seemed to me to be going a little too fast. Peter was fighting hard to catch Tony, and as he put his foot right down, and in the heat of the moment, he did not turn into the corner early enough. When he did turn, it was obvious that he was going too wide. He was only a yard, maybe 2 yards out of line, but it was enough. He went round the corner perfectly normally, but running wide, and the car slid, drifting out. His back wheel hit the bank, and the car lifted, and then, without the slightest warning, fantastically quickly, his car just whipped straight over. My clutch packed up just after the pits next time round. I knew I had had my race. There was no drive in the car at all. Meantime, the race went on, with Tony winning, but my mind was not on it. Sterling broke Fangio's lap record and got the point for the fastest lap before going out with a dead magneto. The next round was in Portugal, and Sterling won with me second. I finished with no breaks at all, but I did get fastest lap. From there, we went to Monza for the Italian race. Afterwards, he told me that he didn't realize that it was me until he saw the green sleeve of my jacket come out and wave at him. It was a sporting gesture on his part to slow down, and he had given me wonderful support, making fastest lap into the bargain, which was a terrific performance in his first drive in a Grand Prix Ferrari. Indeed, if he had not had a tread go early in the race, I think there is little doubt that he would have won the race, although this is not to decry in any way the magnificent show that Tony put up. Thanks to his win, his teammate, Sterling, still had a chance of snatching the championship, although the 6 points I had scored were not going to make it any easier. The various permutations and possibilities were set out by Rodney Walkley in his column in the Motor on September 24th. Everyone, we suppose, is agog, if you know what we mean, to see which of 2 Englishmen will be hailed 1958 world champion after the Grand Prix of Morocco, Casablanca, October 19. A thing in itself without precedent. Mike Hawthorne goes to the circuit with 40 marks, gained in his 6 best races so far. Stirling Moss, who won none at Monza, has 32. If our calculations are correct, Moss must win at Casablanca to be in the picture and add fastest lap to make 41 points. If Mike wins, he will have 44 points, 45 with fastest lap, because although he would gain 8 points for a win, he would drop 4, third place in the Argentine Grand Prix, which will become the most inferior performance out of the 6 best. Second place will give him 42, third place 40, and Sterling must win to equal that and make the fastest lap to beat it. If Mike were to finish anywhere below second or retire, even with fastest lap in his pocket, his marks would remain at 40.
Casablanca was a very fast, again, demanding circuit, and I seem to remember I really was on quite good form, and I did happen to be leading. I was winning the race. I did manage to get fastest lap. Mike wasn't second. He was third. Phil Hill, I think, was second. And the other 2 Van Walls having gone out. and he did the correct thing. He backed off and let Mike come second, which was very frustrating, but I must say, I think it was the correct thing to do. After all, he was a Ferrari driver, and it was more important to him, or to Ferrari, that obviously that Mike should win the title than myself. So I lost the title by, I think, half a point or a point.
Sterling, I think, was extremely unlucky because the 1958 point system was rather ridiculous in that, if you bear in mind that Sterling had won 3 Grand Prix with Van Wall, he'd won 1 Grand Prix with Rob Walker's Cooper in the Argentine, so he had 4 Grand Prix to Mike's 1 Grand Prix, and even I had 3 Grand Prix. You know, there really is something wrong with the point system when the world champion wins on that sort of basis, because in my book, the world champion is the guy who wins the most Grand Prix, because the difference between winning and second and third and fourth is you know, the difference between chalk and cheese. But having said all that, I mean, Mike drove according to the rules and the point system at that time, however crazy we may have thought it was, and therefore all credit to Mike for being the first world champion, because it's always more difficult to be the first to do something, and, you know, he did it, so, you know, marvellous.
I was going to my garage, which was in Dorking. It was a dreadful day in January, pouring with rain, and I'd gone over the Hog's Back, and I just dropped down, and I was in the 300 SL, and I saw a Jaguar come up behind me, and I wasn't used to Jaguars coming up behind me. In fact, I thought it was rather an impertinence. And when we came down from the Hog's Back onto the dual carriageway of the Guildford bypass, the Jaguar came alongside, and I saw it was Mike Hawthorne, and he waved to me, and we both accelerated as hard as we could alongside each other down the dual carriageway, and we were going quickish by then. I lifted off and I dropped about a car's length behind him, and as he went through the bend, the car broke away about 5 degrees, and I thought, oh, this is just Mike in his usual form. And then suddenly it completely spun round and faced me, and we went down the road. By this time I was braking as hard as I could. I could hear that he was still absolutely flat out, although it was going backwards. And he crossed the dual carriageway. There was a lorry coming up the other way, which he missed. In fact, he hit a bollard as he crossed it, and it knocked his bumper off, and I ran over the bumper. And then he went right across, just missed the lorry, went into the grass the other side, and a lot of spume and mud flew up, and I managed to stop opposite on the other side of the dual carriageway. And I ran over the road thinking to go up to him and say, that was a bloody silly thing to do, Mike. And I looked in the car and he wasn't in the driving seat. And then I walked round the car and I saw him lying in the back, full length in the back seat, just as if he was got in the back seat to have a zizz, and his eyes were open, and I saw a trickle of blood coming from the back of it, and as I looked down at him, his eyes suddenly glazed, and I realized that he'd gone.